Jacobean to Restoration period history. Prominent writers, Puritan movement, metaphysical poetry, age of French influence. Q1. What years roughly define the Jacobean period? A. 1603 to 1625. Reign of King James I. Q2. What event marks the beginning of the Restoration period? A. The restoration of King Charles II to the English throne in 1660 Q3. Who was king during the Jacobean period? A. King James I of England, James VI of Scotland. Q4. What major literary work was produced under King James I's patronage? A. The King James Bible, Authorized Version, 1611. Q5. What was the Caroline period? A. The reign of King Charles I, 1625 to 1649, between the Jacobean and Interregnum periods. Q6. What is the Interregnum in English literary history? A. The period between 1649 to 1660, when England had no monarch, ruled first by Parliament and then by Oliver Cromwell as Lord Protector. Q7. Who led the Puritan Commonwealth after the execution of Charles I? A. Oliver Cromwell. Q8. When was King Charles I executed? A. January 30th, 1649. Q9. What is the Puritan movement in the context of English literature? A. A Protestant reform movement that sought to purify the Church of England. It emphasized moral strictness, plain style in writing, and religious themes in literature. Q10. How did the Puritan movement affect English theatre? A. The Puritans closed the theatres in 1642, considering drama morally corrupt. Q11. What is metaphysical poetry? A. A style of 17th century poetry, characterized by intellectual complexity, wit, elaborate conceits, extended metaphors, paradoxes, and the blending of emotion with philosophical argument. Q12. Who coined the term metaphysical poetry? A. Samuel Johnson, in his work Lives of the Poets, 1779. Q13. Which critic first used the word metaphysical in relation to this poetry before Johnson? A. John Dryden, who said, "Done affects the metaphysics." Q14. What is a conceit in metaphysical poetry? A. An elaborate, surprising, and extended metaphor that draws comparisons between two very unlike things. Q15. Name 4 major metaphysical poets. A. John Donne, Andrew Marvell, George Herbert, Henry Vaughan. Q16. What is the age of French influence in English literature? A. The Restoration period, post-1660, when Charles II returned from exile in France, bringing French literary tastes, wit, elegance, satire, and neoclassical rules into English literature. Q17. How did French influence shape Restoration drama? A. It introduced the heroic play, strict dramatic unities, time, place, action, and witty comedies of manners influenced by French dramatists like Molière. Q18. What are the 3 unities influenced by French neoclassicism? A. Unity of action, one main plot, unity of time, story within 24 hours, unity of place, single location. Q19. What literary form dominated the Restoration period? A. Drama, particularly the comedy of manners and the heroic play. Q20. Who is considered the father of English criticism? A. John Dryden. Q21. What was the predominant verse form of the Restoration and early 18th century? A. The heroic couplet, rhymed pairs of iambic pentameter lines. Q22. What is a heroic play? A type of Restoration drama featuring grand themes of love and honor, written in heroic couplets, often influenced by French tragedy. Q23. What is the comedy of manners? A form of Restoration comedy that satirized the artificial social behavior of the upper class, featuring witty dialogue and amoral characters. Q24. Name 2 prominent writers of Restoration comedy of manners. A. William Congreve, The Way of the World, and William Wycherley, The Country Wife. Q25. What was the role of the Cavalier poets? A. They were poets loyal to King Charles I, who wrote light, elegant, witty verse on themes of love and war. Major figures include Robert Herrick, Richard Lovelace, and Thomas Carew. Q26. What distinguishes Jacobean tragedy from Elizabethan tragedy? A. Jacobean tragedy is darker, more cynical, and preoccupied with corruption, revenge, and moral decay. For example, Webster, Turner, unlike the more heroic Elizabethan tragedy. Q27. Name 2 major Jacobean tragedians. A. John Webster, The Duchess of Malfi, and Cyril Tourneur, The Revenger's Tragedy. Q28. What is Baroque style in the context of 17th century literature? A. An elaborate, ornate, and dramatic style reflecting tension, movement, and grandeur seen in the works of Donne and Milton. Q29. Who wrote Areopagitica, and what is it about? A. John Milton. It is a prose tract, 1644, arguing for freedom of the press and against censorship. Q30. What was the Licensing Act that Milton opposed? A. A law requiring government approval before any book could be published. Milton argued against it in Areopagitica. Q31. What major philosophical movement influenced Restoration literature? A. Rationalism and empiricism. The rise of reason and scientific thinking, associated with figures like John Locke and the Royal Society, founded 1660. Q32. What is the significance of the founding of the Royal Society? 1660. A. It promoted scientific inquiry and plain, clear prose style, influencing writers to move away from ornate language toward clarity. 3. What is wit as valued in Restoration literature? A. Intellectual brilliance, clever wordplay, and the ability to make surprising and elegant connections highly prized in both poetry and drama. Q34. How does the Puritan plain style contrast with metaphysical poetry? A. The Puritan plain style emphasized clarity, directness, and moral purpose. Metaphysical poetry used complex conceits, learned allusions, and intellectual argument. Q35. What is the significance of 1642 in English literary history? A. The English Civil War began, and the Puritans closed the theatres. Q36. What is the significance of 1660 in English literary history? A. The restoration of Charles II. Theatres reopened, and French literary influences entered English culture. Q37. Who wrote Leviathan? 1651. And why is it significant to the period? A. Thomas Hobbes. It argued for absolute sovereignty and reflected the political anxieties of the Civil War period. Q38. What role did patronage play in Jacobean and Restoration literature? A. Writers depended on wealthy patrons or the crown for financial support. The Restoration also saw the rise of professional authorship through booksellers. Q39. What is the Graveyard School, and does it belong to this period? A. No, the Graveyard School, for example, Thomas Gray, belongs to the mid-18th century, not the Jacobean Restoration period. Q40. What are emblem books associated with this period? A. Books combining images with moral verses and prose. George Herbert's poetry is often compared to emblem art. Q41. Name the two major political factions of the Restoration period relevant to Dryden's satire. A. The Whigs, supporters of excluding James II, and the Tories, supporters of the crown's hereditary right. Q42. What is neoclassicism as it appeared in Restoration literature? A. A literary movement that looked to ancient Greek and Roman literature as models, emphasizing reason, order, decorum, and moral instruction. 43. Which ancient Roman poets were most influential on Restoration and Augustan writers? A. Virgil, Horace, and Ovid. 44. What is a mock epic? A. A poem that uses the grand style and conventions of epic poetry to treat a trivial or comic subject, as in Pope's The Rape of the Lock. Q45. What is the difference between Jacobean and Caroline literature? A. Jacobean refers to the reign of James I, 1603 to 1625. Caroline refers to the reign of Charles I, 1625 to 1649. Caroline literature tends to be more refined and courtly. Q46. What was the Popish plot? 1678. And how did it influence literature? A. A fabricated conspiracy claiming Catholics planned to assassinate Charles II. It created political hysteria that Dryden addressed in Absalom and Achitophel. Q47. Who is associated with the phrase, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity? A. W.B. Yeats, The Second Coming. This is not from this period. A trick question to test awareness. Q48. What is the literary significance of the term Augustan Age in English literature? A. It refers to the early 18th century. Pope Swift Dryden, named after the Roman Emperor Augustus's reign, a golden age of arts and literature. Q49. Which woman playwright became prominent in the Restoration period? A. Aphra Behn, also known for her prose work Orinoco, 1688. Q50. What is T.S. Eliot's contribution to the reassessment of metaphysical poetry? A. In his 1921 essay, The Metaphysical Poets, Eliot praised the metaphysical poets for their unified sensibility, combining thought and feeling, and used them to critique what he called the dissociation of sensibility in later poetry. Unit 2, Topic 2, John Donne. The ecstasy, a valediction, forbidden morning, the good morrow, the anniversaries. 1. When was John Donne born and when did he die? A. Born 1572, died 1631. Q2. What religion was Donne born into and what did he later convert to? A. He was born into a Roman Catholic family but later converted to Anglicanism. Q3. What two broad phases does Donne's literary career fall into? A. Jack Donne, the young secular love poet, and Dr. Donne, the mature religious preacher and poet. Q4. What position did Donne hold in the Church of England? A. Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, London, from 1621. Q5. Who first classified Donne as a metaphysical poet? A. Samuel Johnson in Lives of the Poets, 1779. Q6. What is the central theme of Donne's love poetry? A. The nature of love, its spiritual, physical, and intellectual dimensions. often arguing that true love transcends the body. Q7. What are Donne's songs and sonnets? A. A collection of his secular love poems, including The Ecstasy, The Good Morrow, and A Valediction, Forbidden Morning. 8. Were Donne's poems published during his lifetime? A. No, most were circulated in manuscript form. They were first published posthumously in 1633. Q9. What is a Donnian conceit? A. An elaborate, surprising metaphor that compares two seemingly unlike things with intellectual precision. For example, comparing two lovers' souls to a compass Q10. What is the meter most associated with Donne's poetry? A. Donne used irregular conversational meter with dramatic rhythms, deliberately breaking from smooth Elizabethan verse. The Ecstasy Q11. What is the meaning of the title, The Ecstasy? A. Ecstasy here means a mystical state, where the soul steps outside the body from Greek ekstasis, standing outside. Q12. How many stanzas does the Ecstasy contain? A. 19. Stanzas of 4 lines, each 76 lines total. Q13. What is the setting of the Ecstasy? A. 2 lovers lying on a bank of violets beside a river, holding hands. Q14. What happens to the lovers' souls in the Ecstasy? A. Their souls leave their bodies and merge into a single, unified soul through the ecstatic experience of love. Q15. What is the central argument of the Ecstasy? A. True love is a union of souls, but the soul must return to the body because the body is the medium through which love is expressed and understood. Q16. What does Donne mean by our bodies, why do we forbear in the Ecstasy? A. He argues that physical union is not degrading, but necessary. The body should not be neglected since the soul communicates through it. Q17. What is the role of the neutral soul in the Ecstasy? A. The 2 lover souls negotiate and merge to form a new, purer, composite soul that is greater than either alone. Q18. What Neoplatonic idea does the Ecstasy engage with? A. The Neoplatonic idea that love is the ascent from physical to spiritual. Donne uses this, but then reverses it by insisting the body matters too. Q19. What is the significance of the pregnant bank image in the Ecstasy? A. It suggests fertility and the generative power of love. The setting mirrors the lovers' spiritual union. Q20. How does the Ecstasy end thematically? A. With the argument that the lovers should return to their bodies, as physical love does not diminish but expresses their spiritual union. A valediction. Forbidden morning. Q21. What is the occasion of a valediction? Forbidden morning? A. Donne is about to depart on a journey to France in 1611 and bids farewell to his wife, Anne More, urging her not to grieve. Q22. Who told Isaac Walton that Donne wrote this poem for his wife, Anne More? A. Isaac Walton himself recorded this in his Life of Donne, 1640. Q23. How many stanzas does a valediction Forbidden Morning contain? A. 9 stanzas of 4 lines, each 36 lines. Q24. What is the famous conceit in A. Valediction Forbidden Morning? A. The compass conceit. The 2 lovers are compared to the 2 legs of a mathematical compass. Q25. Explain the compass conceit in A Valediction Forbidden Morning. A. The fixed foot, wife, stays at the center while the moving foot, Donne, roams. Yet, the fixed foot leans toward the moving one and guides it back to complete the circle, symbolizing their inseparable spiritual bond. Q26. What does Donne compare the parting of lovers to at the opening of the poem? A. To the quiet, peaceful death of virtuous men who pass away without disturbance. Q27. What contrast does Donne draw between dull sublunary lovers and himself and his wife? A. Dull sublunary, earthly lovers depend on physical presence. Their love cannot survive separation. Donne and his wife share a refined, spiritual love that transcends distance. Q28. What does sublunary mean in the poem? A. Below the moon, referring to the earthly, imperfect, changeable world, contrasted with the perfect celestial sphere. Q29. What is meant by trepidation of the spheres in the poem? A. The slight trembling or movement of the celestial spheres in Ptolemaic astronomy. Donne uses it to suggest that even great cosmic movements are less significant than their quiet parting. Q30. What does Donne mean by inter-assured of the mind in the poem? A. That he and his wife are mutually certain of each other's love. Their bond is mental and spiritual, not dependent on physical nearness. The Good Morrow, Cartoon 31. What is the theme of The Good Morrow? A. The awakening of true love. The lovers' world, before they met, was a kind of sleep or unreality. Their love has created a new, complete world. Q32. How many stanzas does The Good Morrow have? A. 3 stanzas of 7 lines each, 21 lines. Q133. What does good morrow mean? A. Good morning. The poem is set at the moment of waking, used metaphorically to mean the awakening of true love. Q34. What does Donne mean by were we not weaned till then in The Good Morrow? A. Before falling in love, They were like unweaned infants, immature and unaware of real experience. Q35. What is the geographical conceit in the good morrow? A. Dawn says their room is a world unto itself. Their faces reflected in each other's eyes are like two hemispheres, forming a perfect world, better than any map or explorer's discovery. Q36. What explorer's reference appears in the good morrow? A. References to sea discoverers and new worlds reflecting the age of exploration. Dunn argues their love is a better discovery than any new land. Q37. What is the philosophical argument of the final stanza of the good morrow? A. If their love is perfectly equal and mixed, it will never decay. Just as in Platonic philosophy, a perfectly balanced mixture is eternal. Q38. What does whatever dies was not mixed equally mean? A. Dunn argues that things decay when their components are unequal. Since their love is perfectly balanced, it will never die. Q39. How does the good morrow reflect the metaphysical style? A. Through its use of a dramatic opening, colloquial language, intellectual argument, geographical and scientific conceits, and the blending of physical and spiritual love. 240. What is the tone of the good morrow? A. Joyful, confident, and intellectually celebratory. The speaker exults in the completeness of their love. The anniversaries. Q41. What are the anniversaries by John Donne? A. Two long poems, An Anatomy of the World, first anniversary 1611, and Of the Progress of the Soul, second anniversary 1612. Q42. For whom were the anniversaries written? A. In memory of Elizabeth Drury, the young daughter of Donne's patron, Sir Robert Drury, who died aged 14 in 1610. Q43. Had Donne ever met Elizabeth Drury? A. No, he never met her, which made his extravagant praise of her controversial. Q44. What is the theme of the first anniversary? An Anatomy of the World. A. The decay and corruption of the world following the death of Elizabeth Drury, who symbolizes virtue, order, and the soul of the world. 45. What is the theme of the second anniversary? Of the progress of the soul. A. The soul's journey to heaven, a meditation on death, the body's worthlessness, and the soul's liberation and progress toward God. Q46. What famous line from the first anniversary reflects the new philosophy? A. And new philosophy calls all in doubt. Donne laments that the new Copernican science has destroyed the old certainties of the universe. Q47. What does Donne mean by the new philosophy calls all in doubt? A. The Copernican heliocentric theory and new scientific discoveries had undermined the old Ptolemaic worldview and traditional certainties about the cosmos and humanity's place in it. Q48. What criticism did Ben Jonson make of the anniversaries? A. Ben Jonson said the poems were blasphemous because Donne had described Elizabeth Drury in terms that should only be used for the Virgin Mary. Q49. What is the structural principle of the anniversaries? A. Each anniversary poem is structured around meditations and eulogies, alternating sections of lamentation about the world's decay with praise of Elizabeth Drury. 250. What is the literary significance of the anniversaries in the history of English poetry? A. They're among the longest and most ambitious poems of the period, blending elegy, satire, philosophy, and theology. They also reflect the crisis of the early 17th century as old certainties gave way to new science and religious doubt. Unit 2, Topic 3, Andrew Marvell. To his coy mistress, Q1. When was Andrew Marvell born and when did he die? A. Born 1621, died 1678. Q2. Where was Andrew Marvell born? A. Winstead in Holderness, Yorkshire, England. Q3. What university did Marvell attend? A. Trinity College, Cambridge. Q4. What political role did Marvell play in his life? A. He served as Member of Parliament for Hull, 1659 to 1678, and was a staunch defender of religious toleration and political liberty. Q5. Who was Marvell's famous friend and colleague, with whom he worked as a Latin secretary? A. John Milton. Marvell helped secure Milton's release after the Restoration and worked alongside him as Assistant Latin Secretary to the Council of State. Q6. What are the two broad categories of Marvell's poetry? A. Lyric/pastoral poetry. For example, To His Coy Mistress, The Garden, and political poetry. For example, an Horatian ode upon Cromwell's return from Ireland. Q7. Was Marvell's poetry published during his lifetime? A. Most of his lyric poems were published posthumously in Miscellaneous Poems, 1681. Q8. What is Marvell's most famous poem? A. To His Coy Mistress, written circa 1650s, published 1681. Q9. To which literary school does Marvell belong? A. The metaphysical poets, though he also shows strong classical and pastoral influences. Q10. What Latin phrase best describes the central theme of To His Coy Mistress? A. Carpe diem, seize the day, urging the enjoyment of life and love before time runs out. to his coy mistress. Structure and form. Q11. How many lines does to his coy mistress contain? A. 46 lines. Q12. Into how many sections slash stanzas is to his coy mistress divided? A. 3 verse paragraphs, not stanzas in the traditional sense. Q13. What is the rhyme scheme of to his coy mistress? A. Rhyming couplets. A. B, B, C, C. Heroic couplets in iambic tetrameter. Q14. What is the meter of to his coy mistress? A. Iambic tetrameter. 4 iambic feet per line, unlike the 5 feet of iambic pentameter. Q15. What is the logical structure of the 3 sections of the poem? A. It follows a syllogistic, logical argument. If, but, therefore. Section 1. If we had unlimited time, your coyness would be fine. Section 2. But time is short and death awaits. Section 3. Therefore, let us seize the moment and make love now. Section 1. Had we but whirled enough in time te. Q16. What is the opening line of to his coy mistress? A. Had we but whirled enough and time whack. Q17. What does the speaker say he would do if they had unlimited time? A. He would spend centuries admiring each part of his mistress's body, praising her eyes, forehead, and love. 19. How long does the speaker say he would devote to praising each breast? A. 200 years to each breast. Q to 20. What geographical references appear in section 1? A. The speaker would love by the Indian Ganges, exotic, distant, while his mistress could complain by the Humber, the river near Marvell's hometown Hull, contrasting the vast and the local. Q21. What biblical time references appear in section 1? A. The speaker says his love began before Noah's flood and would last until the conversion of the Jews, believed to happen at the end of time, suggesting an eternity of devotion. Q22. What does vegetable love mean in the poem? A. A love that grows slowly and organically, like a plant, vast, unhurried, and rooted. It implies a love that expands endlessly if time permitted. Q23. What is the tone of section 1? A. Playful, hyperbolic, and flattering. The speaker uses extravagant compliments with underlying irony. Section 2. But at my back I always hear. Q24. What is the most famous line from section 2? A. But at my back I always hear / time's winged chariot hurrying near. Q25. What does time's winged chariot represent? A. The swift, unstoppable passage of time, rushing toward death. Time is personified as a chariot driver racing toward them. Q26. What lies before the lovers, according to section 2? A. Deserts of vast eternity. The vast, empty wasteland of death and nothingness after life. Q27. What happens to beauty, according to the speaker in section 2? A. The mistress's beauty will turn to dust in the grave, and her honor, virtue / chastity, will be reduced to ashes. Q28. What darkly ironic point does the speaker make about virginity in section 2? A. That her long-preserved virginity will be lost to the worms in the grave, so she might as well surrender it to him now. Q29. What is the tone of section 2? A. Dark, urgent, and morbid. The speaker confronts the mistress with the inevitability of death and decay. Q30. What does marble vault refer to in section 2? A. The tomb or grave, a place of cold, hard, eternal silence where no lovemaking occurs. Q31. What does the speaker mean by none, I think, do their embrace? A. A sardonic remark that the dead do not make love. So the grave offers no romantic fulfillment, reinforcing the urgency of the present. Q32. How does section 2 use the metaphysical technique? A. Through shocking, morbid imagery. Worms, grave, dust, combined with logical argument, using death as a rational reason for love, blending the physical and philosophical. Section 3. Now therefore, while the youthful hue, Q33. What is the opening of section 3 and what does it signal? A. Now therefore, while the youthful hue / sits on thy skin like morning dew, it signals the conclusion of the argument, urging immediate action. Q34. What image does Marvel use for the lovers in section 3? A. Like amorous birds of prey. A startling, violent image suggesting passionate, fierce, consuming love rather than gentle romance. Q35. What does amorous birds of prey suggest about the nature of love in the poem? A. That love is not merely tender and sentimental, but aggressive, urgent, and powerful. It devours time rather than being devoured by it. Q36. What does the speaker mean by tear our pleasures with rough strife, slash through the iron gates of life? A. That the lovers should forcefully seize their pleasures, breaking through the hard constraints and limitations of mortal life. Q37. What is the famous concluding couplet of To His Coy Mistress? A. Thus, though we cannot make our son / stand still, yet we will make him run. Q38. What is the meaning of the final couplet? A. They cannot stop time, make the sun stand still, but by living passionately, they can make time seem to accelerate. They will outpace time by living intensely. Q39. What biblical allusion underlies make our sun stand still? A. The story of Joshua in the Bible, Joshua 10:12-13, where God made the sun stand still to give Israel more time in battle. Q40. What is the tone of section 3? A. Energetic, urgent, and triumphant. The speaker calls for passionate action as the solution to time's tyranny. Themes, techniques, and criticism. 41. What are the major themes of To His Coy Mistress? A. Carpe diem, seize the day. The passage of time, mortality, love, and desire. The tension between the ideal and the real. Q42. How does Marvel use irony in To His Coy Mistress? A. The extravagant praise of section 1 is ironic. The speaker doesn't truly believe he has endless time. The flattery is a rhetorical device to persuade the mistress. Q43. Who is the coy mistress in the poem? A. She is unnamed. She represents a woman who is playfully or genuinely reluctant to yield to the speaker's advances. Coy means modest or reserved. Q44. Does the mistress speak in the poem? A. No. The poem is a dramatic monologue. Only the speaker's voice is heard. Q45. How does To His Coy Mistress compare to other Carpe Diem poems like Herrick's To the Virgins? A. Herrick's poem is gentler and more conventional. Marvel's is more intellectually complex, darkly ironic, and uses metaphysical conceits, Time's chariot, birds of prey, rather than simple floral imagery. Q46. What is T.S. Eliot's view of To His Coy Mistress? A. Eliot praised it as an example of unified sensibility, the fusion of thought and feeling, citing the line about the chariot as a moment where the idea and the emotion are inseparable. Q47. How does the poem reflect the metaphysical style? A. Through its logical three-part argument, dramatic opening, surprising conceits, Time's chariot, birds of prey, vegetable love, colloquial yet intellectual tone, and blending of love with mortality. Q48. What is the significance of the Ganges/Humber contrast? A. It juxtaposes the exotic, Ganges equals romance, distance, luxury, with the mundane, Humber equals local, ordinary, to create ironic contrast and show the vastness of imagined time. Q49. How has feminist criticism approached To His Coy Mistress? A. Feminist critics have noted that the poem silences the woman entirely. She is the object of persuasion, not a subject with her own voice. The speaker uses logic and fear of death to pressure her. Q50. What is the lasting literary significance of To His Coy Mistress? A. It is considered one of the greatest Carpe Diem poems in the English language, remarkable for its intellectual brilliance, structural elegance, tonal range, from playful to morbid to triumphant, and its perfect fusion of argument and emotion, a supreme example of metaphysical poetry. Unit 2. Topic 4. John Milton. Paradise Lost. Book 1. Q1. When was John Milton born and when did he die? A. Born 1608, died 1674. Q2. Where was Milton born? A. Cheapside, London, England. Q3. What university did Milton attend? A. Christ's College, Cambridge University. Q4. What physical affliction did Milton suffer while writing Paradise Lost? A. He was completely blind. He lost his sight by 1652 and dictated Paradise Lost to his daughters and amanuenses. Q5. What political cause did Milton actively support? A. He was a staunch supporter of the Puritan Commonwealth and Oliver Cromwell, serving as Secretary for Foreign Tongues, Latin Secretary, to the Council of State. Q6. What happened to Milton after the restoration of Charles II in 1660? A. He was briefly imprisoned, his books were burned, but he was eventually pardoned, likely due to the intervention of friends, including Andrew Marvell. Q7. When was Paradise Lost first published? A. 1667 in 10 books, revised to 12 books in 1674. Q8. What is the source material for Paradise Lost? A. Primarily the Book of Genesis, Bible, the story of Satan's rebellion, the fall of the angels, and the fall of man. Q9. What is the stated purpose of Paradise Lost as declared by Milton? A. To justify the ways of God to men, to explain and defend divine providence and God's plan for humanity. Q10. What epic tradition does Paradise Lost belong to? A. The classical epic tradition modeled on Homer's Iliad and Odyssey and Virgil's Aeneid, but a Christian epic. Paradise Lost form and structure. Q11. How many books does the final version of Paradise Lost contain? A. 12 books. The 1667 edition had 10. Milton divided 2 books each into 2 for the 1674 edition. Q to 12. What verse form does Milton use in Paradise Lost? A. Blank verse, unrhymed iambic pentameter. Q13. Why did Milton choose blank verse and reject rhyme? A. Milton explicitly stated in his preface that rhyme was a troublesome and modern bondage. He saw it as an unnecessary constraint, unsuited to a serious epic. Q14. What is the total number of lines in Paradise Lost? A. Approximately 10,565 lines. Q15. What is an epic invocation and where does it appear in Book 1? A. An invocation is an appeal to a muse for inspiration. Milton opens Book 1 by invoking the heavenly muse, the Holy Spirit, asking for divine guidance to tell this great story. Book 1. Summary and content Q16. What are the opening lines of Paradise Lost Book 1? A. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit / of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste / brought death into the world and all our woe. Q17. What muse does Milton invoke in Book 1? A. The heavenly muse, identified with Urania, muse of astronomy, but more specifically, the Holy Spirit, which Milton says inspired Moses on Mount Sinai and Horeb. Q18. What does Milton mean by invoking a muse that prefers the upright heart and pure? A. Unlike classical poets who invoked pagan muses, Milton's inspiration is divine. He asked the Holy Spirit to illuminate his mind and heart, emphasizing moral and spiritual worthiness. Q19. Where does Book 1 of Paradise Lost begin? A. In Medias Aires, in the middle of things, Satan and his fallen angels have already been defeated and cast into hell. The poem opens with them lying on the burning lake of hell. Q20. What is the setting of Book 1 of Paradise Lost? A. Hell described as a place of fire, darkness, and chaos, a dungeon of burning darkness. Q21. What famous paradox does Milton use to describe hell's light? A. Darkness visible. Hell's fire gives enough light to see the horrors of damnation, but no genuine illumination or comfort. Q22. Who are the two main characters introduced in Book 1? A. Satan and Beelzebub. Satan is the leader, Beelzebub his chief lieutenant. Q23. What is Satan's first speech about in Book 1? A. Satan rallies Beelzebub and refuses to accept defeat. He declares that his mind and will are unconquered and that he will never submit to God. Q24. What is Satan's most famous declaration in Book 1? A. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Q25. What does Satan mean by the mind is its own place and in itself / can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven? A. Satan argues that one's mental state determines one's experience. A proud, defiant mind can find dignity even in hell. This also shows his self-deception and pride. Q26. What caused Satan's rebellion against God according to Paradise Lost? A. Pride and ambition. Satan could not bear to be subordinate to God, especially after God exalted the Son above all angels. Q27. What does Satan do after his first speech in Book 1? A. He rises from the burning lake, flies to the shore of hell, and rallies his fallen angels who lie scattered on the burning plain in Q28. What simile does Milton use to describe the number of fallen angels in Book 1? A. They are compared to autumn leaves in Vallombrosa, an Italian valley, and to the army of Pharaoh drowned in the Red Sea, suggesting their vast, innumerable multitude. Q29. What are the names of some of the chief fallen angels, devils, introduced in Book 1? A. Moloch, Belial, Mammon, Beelzebub, Mulciber, Vulcan, and Dagon, each associated with pagan gods of the ancient world. Q30. What is Pandemonium in Book 1? A. The palace built by the fallen angels in hell, the capital of hell. The word literally means all demons and was coined by Milton. Satan as a character. Q31. How is Satan physically described in Book 1? A. As a gigantic, majestic, but scarred figure still bearing the brightness of his former angelic glory, but now marked by ruin, compared to the Titans and Leviathan. Q32. What is the Leviathan simile in Book 1? A. Satan lying on the burning lake is compared to a Leviathan, a sea monster / whale, so huge that sailors mistake it for an island and anchor their ships to it, suggesting his enormous size and deceptive nature. Q33. What heroic qualities does Satan display in Book 1:1? A. Courage, leadership, rhetorical brilliance, defiance, determination, and loyalty to his followers, qualities that make him appear heroic. Q34. Why do some critics call Satan the hero of Paradise Lost? A. Because in the Book 1 especially, Satan is the most dynamic, energetic, and compelling character. His defiance and grandeur have led romantic poets like Blake and Shelley to see him as the true hero. Q35. What did William Blake mean by saying Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it? A. Blake argued in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell that Milton unconsciously made Satan so magnificent and vital that Satan, not God, becomes the imaginative center of the poem. Q36. How does Milton subtly undermine Satan's heroism in Book 1? A. Through dramatic irony, Satan's boasts of freedom are shown to be self-deception. His unconquerable will is really pride. He is in hell and cannot escape it despite his grand speeches. Q37. What is Satan's rhetorical strategy in his speeches in Book 1? A. He uses persuasion, flattery, distortion of truth, and appeals to pride and honor to rally his followers, the same tactics he will later use to tempt Eve. Q38. How does Satan's character change across the 12 books of Paradise Lost? A. He begins grandly in Book 1, but progressively degrades. By Book 9, he has become a serpent, showing his moral decline from proud rebel to instrument of evil Q39. What is the theme of Satan's opening speech regarding free will? A. Satan claims he and his angels chose freely and will continue to defy God freely, but Milton shows this freedom is really slavery to pride and sin Q40. What does Satan's phrase evil, be thou my good, Book 4, reveal about his character? A. It shows his total moral inversion. He has so completely rejected God that he has redefined evil as his good. It marks his complete corruption. Themes, style, and criticism. Q41. What are the major themes of Paradise Lost? A. The fall of man, free will and obedience, pride and disobedience, redemption, the nature of good and evil, the relationship between God and humanity. Q42. What is the epic simile, and how does Milton use it in Book 1? A. An extended comparison. Running several lines, Milton uses epic similes to compare Satan and the fallen angels to figures from classical mythology, history, and nature, for example, Autumn Leaves, Leviathan, Pharaoh's Army. Q43. What classical epics most influenced Paradise Lost? A. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey and Virgil's Aeneid. Milton consciously models and surpasses them by writing a Christian epic on the grandest possible subject. Q44. How does Paradise Lost differ from classical epics? A. Classical epics glorify human heroism and martial valor. Milton's epic internalizes the conflict. The true heroism is obedience to God and moral virtue, not military prowess. Q45. What is the grand style associated with Milton? A. An elevated, majestic, poetic style characterized by long, complex sentences, Latinate vocabulary, inverted syntax, classical allusions, and sustained grandeur. Q46. What does Milton mean by justify the ways of God to men? Is he successful? A. Milton aims to show that God's permission of the fall was just and necessary for human free will and ultimate redemption. Critics debate his success, with some arguing Satan's grandeur undermines the theodicy. Q47. What is a theodicy? A philosophical/theological attempt to explain why a good and all-powerful God permits evil and suffering. Paradise Lost is considered the greatest theodicy in English literature. Q48. How does Book 1 of Paradise Lost reflect Milton's Puritan beliefs? A. Through its emphasis on obedience to God, the danger of pride, the consequences of disobedience, and the moral seriousness of its purpose to instruct as well as delight. Q49. What is the significance of the phrase in medias res as applied to Paradise Lost? A. Milton begins the epic in the middle of the action, Satan already in hell, following the classical epic convention established by Homer and Virgil. The backstory is revealed later through narration. Q50. What is the lasting literary significance of Paradise Lost? A. It is widely considered the greatest epic poem in the English language, a monumental achievement that synthesizes classical epic tradition, Christian theology, and Renaissance humanism. Its influence on English poetry, from Blake to Keats to Tennyson, has been immeasurable, and its portrait of Satan remains one of the most complex and debated characters in all of literature. Topic 4. John Milton, John Dryden, Absalom, and Achitophel, 1402. Unit 2, Topic 5, John Dryden. Absalom and Achitophel. 1. When was John Dryden born and when did he die? A. Born 1631, died 1700 Q2. Where was Dryden born? A. Aldwinkle, Northamptonshire, England, Q3. What prestigious title was Dryden awarded in 1668? A. Poet Laureate of England, the first to hold the title officially, Q4. What additional title was Dryden given in 1670? A. Historiographer Royal, the official historian of the Crown, Q5. What religion did Dryden convert to and when? A. He converted to Roman Catholicism in 1685, after the accession of the Catholic King James II, Q6. What happened to Dryden's laureateship after the Glorious Revolution of 1688? A. He lost it because he refused to take oaths of allegiance to the new Protestant monarchs, William and Mary, remaining loyal to his Catholic faith, Q7. Why is Dryden called the father of English criticism? A. Because he was the first major English writer to systematically discuss and theorize about literature. His essay of dramatic poesy, 1668, is the first significant work of literary criticism in English, Q8. What is Dryden's essay of dramatic poesy about? A. A dialogue in which 4 characters debate the merits of classical versus modern drama. French versus English, theatre. Dryden defends English drama while acknowledging classical rules, Q9. What verse form did Dryden perfect and champion? A. The heroic couplet, rhymed pairs of iambic pentameter lines, Q10. Name any 2 other major works by Dryden besides Absalom and Achitophel. A. Macflecknoe, 1682, The Hind and the Panther, 1687. All for Love, 1677. Alexander's Feast, 1697. Historical background. 11. What historical event does Absalom and Achitophel deal with? A. The Exclusion Crisis, 1678 to 1681, a political crisis over whether James, Duke of York, a Catholic, should be excluded from succeeding his brother, King Charles II. Q12. Who was the Earl of Shaftesbury, and what role did he play in the crisis? A. Anthony Ashley Cooper, first Earl of Shaftesbury, leader of the Whig Party, who campaigned to exclude James from the throne and promote the Duke of Monmouth as Protestant successor. Q13. Who was the Duke of Monmouth? A. James Scott, the illegitimate son of King Charles II, a Protestant whom the Whigs wanted to make the legitimate heir to the throne. Q14. Who commissioned Dryden to write Absalom and Achitophel? A. King Charles II himself commissioned it as political propaganda to discredit Shaftesbury before his trial for treason. Q15. When was Absalom and Achitophel published? A. November 1681, just before Shaftesbury's trial for high treason. Q16. What was the immediate political effect of the poem? A. Though Shaftesbury was acquitted by a sympathetic Whig jury, the poem damaged his reputation and contributed to the ultimate failure of the exclusion movement. Q17. What is the Popish plot, 1678, and how does it relate to the poem? A. A fabricated conspiracy by Titus Oates, claiming Catholics planned to kill Charles II. It inflamed anti-Catholic sentiment and fueled the exclusion crisis that the poem addresses. Q18. What are the two main political factions depicted in the poem? A. The Tories, supporters of hereditary succession and Charles II, and the Whigs, supporters of exclusion and Monmouth. Q19. Which side does Dryden support in the poem? A. The Tory side. He supports King Charles II and the principle of legitimate hereditary succession against the Whig conspirators. Q20. What literary genre does Absalom and Achitophel belong to? A. Political satire, specifically a mock heroic satirical poem using biblical allegory. The biblical allegory, Q21. What biblical story does Absalom and Achitophel allegorize? A. The story from 2 Samuel, Bible, of Absalom's rebellion against his father King David, encouraged by the counselor Achitophel. Q22. Who does King David represent in the poem? A. King Charles II of England. Q23. Who does Absalom represent? A. James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, Charles II's illegitimate son. 24. Who does Achitophel represent? A. The Earl of Shaftesbury, the cunning political advisor who encourages Absalom/Monmouth to rebel. Q25. Who does he represent in the poem? A. George Villiers, the second Duke of Buckingham, a shifting, inconsistent politician satirized for his unreliability. Q26. Who does Cora represent? A. Titus Oates, the man who fabricated the Popish plot. Q27. Who does Barzillai represent? A. The Duke of Ormond, a loyal supporter of Charles II, praised in the poem. Q28. Who does Jotham represent? A. The Marquess of Halifax, a moderate politician who opposed the Exclusion Bill. Q29. Who does Og represent? A. Thomas Shadwell Dryden's literary rival, also satirized in Macflecknoe. Q3O. Why did Dryden use biblical allegory instead of naming characters directly? A. To provide artistic distance and legal protection. Direct political attack could be dangerous. Allegory allowed criticism while maintaining deniability and artistic respectability. Content and key passages. Q31. How does the poem open and what tone does it establish? A. It opens with a witty, ironic description of King David, Charles II, as a polygamous king whose many illegitimate children were a sign of his generous, kingly nature, establishing the poem's tone of urbane, sophisticated irony. Q32. What are the opening lines of Absalom and Achitophel? A. In pious times, ere priestcraft did begin, before polygamy was made a sin, a witty, ironic opening, defending Charles II's promiscuity. Q33. How does Dryden portray Absalom, Monmouth, in the poem? A. Sympathetically, but critically, Absalom is portrayed as brave, handsome, and naturally gifted, but fatally susceptible to the flattery and manipulation of Achitophel. Q34. What is Achitophel's character portrait in the poem? A. One of the most devastating character portraits in English literature, Achitophel is shown as brilliant but restless, unable to leave well enough alone, a man whose great talents are perverted by ambition and discontent. Q35. What is the famous description of Achitophel's character? A. A fiery soul, which working out its way, fretted the pygmy body to decay, suggesting his vast intellect consumes his frail physical frame. Q36. What argument does Achitophel use to tempt Absalom to rebel? A. He appeals to Absalom's ambition, telling him his royal qualities deserve a crown. He argues that the people love him and that Charles II's legitimate heir, James, will be a tyrant. Q37. How does Absalom respond to Achitophel's temptation initially? A. He hesitates. He acknowledges his love for his father and his reluctance to rebel, but Achitophel gradually overcomes his resistance through flattery and political argument. Q38. What is the famous portrait of Zimri, Duke of Buckingham? A. A man so various that he seemed to be not one, but all mankind's epitome. Zimri is satirized as a man of no fixed principles, dabbling in everything and committing to nothing. Q39. How does Dryden distinguish between loyal and disloyal supporters in the poem? A. He contrasts the steady, virtuous Tory supporters, like Barzillai, with the self-interested, unstable Whig conspirators. Loyalty is associated with virtue and stability. Disloyalty with ambition and chaos. Q40. How does the poem end? A. King David, Charles II, makes a long, powerful speech asserting his royal authority and condemning the rebels, after which God thunders his approval and the loyal party triumphs. Themes, style, and criticism. Q41. What are the major themes of Absalom and Achitophel? A. Political loyalty and rebellion, the dangers of ambition, the nature of kingship, the corruption of talented men by flattery, order versus chaos, legitimate authority versus popular rebellion. Q42. What is the tone of Absalom and Achitophel? A. Urbane, witty, ironic, and satirical Dryden maintains an air of rational superiority while devastating his political opponents. Q43. How does Dryden use the heroic couplet for satirical effect? A. The closed, balanced, heroic couplet allows Dryden to deliver devastating judgments with epigrammatic precision. A character can be praised and damned in two perfectly balanced lines. Q44. What is an epigram and how does Dryden use it? A. A short, witty, pointed saying. Dryden's heroic couplets frequently achieve epigrammatic effect, making his satirical portraits memorable and quotable. Q45. How does Absalom and Achitophel reflect neoclassical values? A. Through its use of classical models, the epic, its appeal to reason and order, its moral seriousness, its formal verse structure, and its view that political stability and obedience to legitimate authority are rational virtues. Q46. How does Dryden treat the theme of free will in the poem? A. He shows Absalom as having free will. He could have resisted Achitophel's temptation, and thus bears responsibility for his rebellion. This echoes the Miltonic theme of free will and the fall. Q47. What is the significance of the poem in the history of English satire? A. It established political satire in verse as a major literary form combining the grandeur of the epic with the precision of satire. It directly influenced Pope's The Rape of the Lock and the Dunciad. Q48. How does Dryden's portrayal of Charles II serve his political purpose? A. By making David/Charles appear patient, merciful, and ultimately just a king who tries peaceful reconciliation before asserting his authority. Dryden presents the monarchy as moderate and legitimate, not tyrannical. Q49. What is the relationship between Absalom and Achitophel and Macflecknoe? A. Both are major satirical poems by Dryden. Macflecknoe, 1682, is a literary satire targeting Thomas Shadwell. Absalom and Achitophel is political satire. Together, they establish Dryden as the master of Augustan satire. Q50. What is the lasting literary significance of Absalom and Achitophel? A. It is the greatest political satire in the English language, a poem that successfully combines epic grandeur, biblical allegory, psychological portraiture, and epigrammatic wit to serve an immediate political purpose while achieving timeless literary value. It set the standard for all subsequent verse satire in English, directly inspiring Alexander Pope. Checkmark. Topic 5. John Dryden, Alexander Pope, The Rape of the Lock, 1403. Unit 2, Topic 6, Alexander Pope. The Rape of the Lock. Q. 1. When was Alexander Pope born and when did he die? A. Born 1688, died 1744 from TQ2. Where was Pope born? A. London, England, Ploughcourt, Lombard Street. Q3. What physical condition affected Pope throughout his life? A. Pott's disease, tuberculosis of the spine. It left him severely hunched, stunted his growth. He was only about 4 feet 6 inches tall and caused him chronic pain throughout his life. Q4. What religion was Pope and how did it affect his career? A. He was a Roman Catholic, which barred him from universities, public office, and living within 10 miles of London under the Test Acts. He was thus an outsider to the establishment. Q5. How did Pope achieve financial independence as a writer? A. Through his enormously successful translations of Homer, his translation of the Iliad, 1715 to 1720, and Odyssey, 1725 to 1726, made him wealthy enough to lease his famous villa at Twickenham. Q6. What is Pope's famous villa and where was it? A. Twickenham, on the Thames near London, where he created a famous garden and grotto which became a centre of literary and social life. Q7. What verse form did Pope perfect above all others? A. The heroic couplet. He brought it to its highest point of elegance, balance, and wit. 8. Name 4 major works by Pope besides The Rape of the Lock. A. The Dunciad, 1728. An essay on criticism, 1711. An essay on man, 1733 to 1734. Moral essays, 1731 to 1735. Q9. What is Pope's An Essay on Criticism about? A. Written when Pope was only 23. It is a verse essay laying down principles of literary criticism and taste, containing famous maxims like a little learning is a dangerous thing. Q10. To which literary period does Pope belong? A. The Augustan Age, also called the Neoclassical Age, the early 18th century, when English writers modeled themselves on ancient Roman writers of Augustus's reign. Background to The Rape of the Lock. Q11. When was The Rape of the Lock first published, and in how many versions? A. First published in 1712. 2 cantos. Expanded to 5 cantos in 1714. The definitive version. Q12. What real-life incident inspired The Rape of the Lock? A. Lord Robert Petre cut a lock of hair from Arabella Fermour's head without her permission, causing a serious quarrel between the two aristocratic Catholic families, the Petres and Fermours. Q13. Who asked Pope to write the poem, and for what purpose? A. John Carroll, a mutual friend of both families, asked Pope to write a humorous poem to reconcile the quarreling families by making them laugh at the incident. Q14. Who does Belinda represent in the poem? A. Arabella Fermour, the young society lady whose lock of hair was cut. Q15. Who does the Baron represent? A. Lord Robert Petre, the young nobleman who cut the lock. Q16. What is a mock epic or mock heroic poem? A. A poem that applies the grand style, conventions, and machinery of classical epic poetry to a trivial or comic subject, creating humor through the contrast between the elevated form and the insignificant content. Q17. What classical epics does Pope imitate and parody in The Rape of the Lock? A. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey and Virgil's Aeneid. Pope uses their conventions: invocation, supernatural machinery, epic battles, divine intervention, to treat a petty social squabble. Q18. What is the rape in the title and what does it mean? A. Rape here means seizure or snatching. From Latin rapere, the forcible taking of the lock of hair. It does not mean sexual assault, though the word's double meaning adds ironic weight. Q19. What is the structure of The Rape of the Lock? A. 5 cantos written in heroic couplets. Canto 1, Preparation/Mourning. Canto 2, The Voyage. Canto 3, The Rape. Canto 4, The Cave of Spleen. Canto 5, The Battle and Apotheosis. Q20. What is the sylph machinery in the poem and where does it come from? A. Pope invented a system of supernatural beings called sylphs, as spirits. Drawn from Rosicrucian philosophy, they serve as Belinda's guardian spirits and replace the Olympian gods of classical epic. Canto 1, The Mourning and Preparation. Q21. How does The Rape of the Lock open? What epic convention does Pope follow? A. With a mock invocation, Pope addresses his friend John Carroll and declares his subject, parodying the epic opening. For example, Homer's Sing, O Goddess. Q22. Who is Ariel in the poem? A. Belinda's chief guardian, Sylph, a spirit who warns her in a dream that some disaster is approaching but cannot reveal what it is. Q23. What does Ariel tell Belinda in her dream in Canto 1? A. That she is protected by a host of sylphs who guard her honor and beauty, and that some dread event threatens her, but the nature of the threat is hidden. Q24. What is Belinda doing at the opening of Canto 1? A. She's asleep and dreaming. She wakes late in the morning, reads a love letter, and then prepares herself at her dressing table. Q25. What is the famous toilet scene in Canto 1? A. Belinda's elaborate preparation at her dressing table, described in the language of a religious ritual, with her cosmetics as sacred objects and her mirror as an altar, mocking the vanity of fashionable society. Q26. What epic convention does the toilet scene parody? A. The arming of the hero before battle, as in Homer's arming of Achilles. Belinda's application of makeup is treated as a warrior preparing for combat. Canto 2, The Voyage. Q27. What happens in Canto 2? A. Belinda and her companions travel by boat on the Thames to Hampton Court. Ariel assembles the sylphs and assigns them to guard Belinda's most precious possessions, especially her 2 locks of hair. Q28. How does Pope describe Belinda's appearance on the boat in Canto 2? A. As a goddess or sun, her beauty outshines everything around her, described in epic similes that mock heroic grandeur by applying it to a pretty girl on a pleasure boat. Canto 3, The Rape. Q31. What is the setting of Canto 3? A. Hampton Court Palace, where the fashionable society gathers to play cards, drink coffee, and gossip. Q32. What card game is played in Canto 3 and what is its significance? A. Ombre, a fashionable three-handed card game. Pope describes it as an epic battle with the cards as warriors, parodying Homer's battle scenes. Q33. What happens after the card game in Canto 3? A. The company drinks coffee, and it is the fumes of coffee that inspire the Baron to execute his plan to cut Belinda's lock. Q34. How does the Baron cut Belinda's lock? A. He uses a pair of scissors, described as the glittering forfex, with the help of Clarissa, who hands him the scissors. He snips the lock while Belinda is distracted. Q35. What epic convention does the cutting of the lock parody? A. The climactic battle scene of an epic, The Rape of the Lock, is treated with all the solemnity of a heroic deed in battle, complete with exclamations from heaven and earth. Q36. What is Belinda's reaction to the loss of her lock? A. She is furious and grief-stricken. Her rage is described in terms that mock the epic rage of Achilles, treating a trivial social insult as a cosmic catastrophe. Canto 4. The Cave of Spleen. Q37. What is the Cave of Spleen in Canto 4? A. The underground realm of the goddess Spleen, representing melancholy, ill temper, and fashionable female depression. The gnome Umbriel visits it to collect grief and anger for Belinda. Q38. Who is Umbriel? A. A gnome, earth spirit, the darker counterpart to the sylphs. He visits the Cave of Spleen and brings back a bag of sighs and tears and a vial of sorrows to intensify Belinda's distress. Q39. What epic convention does the Cave of Spleen parody? A. The epic descent to the underworld, as in Virgil's Aeneid Book 6 and Homer's Odyssey. Pope replaces the classical underworld with the fashionable world of female hysteria and hypochondria. Q40. What is the social satire in the Cave of Spleen episode? A. Pope satirizes the fashionable 18th century female complaint of the spleen, depression/hysteria, suggesting that Belinda's distress is as much a social performance as genuine grief. Canto 5, The Battle and Apotheosis. Q41. What happens in Canto 5? A. A mock battle breaks out between the ladies and gentlemen. Belinda tries to recapture her lock, but fails. The lock mysteriously disappears and is said to have ascended to the heavens as a new star. Q42. What speech does Clarissa make in Canto 5, and what is its significance? 8. Clarissa, who gave the Baron the scissors, makes a speech urging good humor and sense over vanity, the moral center of the poem, suggesting that beauty fades and good sense is more valuable. Q43. What epic convention does Clarissa's speech parody? A. The epic council speech like Nestor's advice in Homer. Clarissa offers wisdom that the characters ignore, continuing the battle anyway. Q44. What happens to Belinda's lock at the end of the poem? A. It ascends to the heavens and becomes a new star, constellation. Pope consoles Belinda by saying her lock will be immortalized in the sky and remembered by future generations. Q45. What epic convention does the apotheosis of the lock parody? A. The deification or apotheosis of heroes after death, as in Virgil's Aeneid. Pope gives Belinda's trivial lock the honor reserved for epic heroes. Themes, style, and criticism. 46. Are the major themes of The Rape of the Lock? A. Vanity and superficiality of fashionable society, the triviality of social conventions, the battle of the sexes, the power and fragility of female beauty, appearance versus reality, the mock-heroic deflation of pride. Q47. How does Pope use the mock-heroic form to satirize society? A. By applying the grandeur of epic to trivial events, Pope exposes how society treats petty matters, a lock of hair, with the seriousness of great battles, revealing the emptiness and vanity of fashionable life. Q48. What is Pope's attitude toward Belinda? Is he sympathetic or critical? A. Both. He clearly finds her charming and beautiful, but also gently mocks her vanity and self-importance. His satire is light and affectionate rather than savage. Q49. How does The Rape of the Lock reflect Augustan neoclassical values? A. Through its formal elegance, use of reason and wit, moral purpose, satirizing vanity, appeal to classical models, and the belief that art should both delight and instruct. Q50. What is the lasting literary significance of The Rape of the Lock? A. It is universally considered the greatest mock epic in the English language, a perfect fusion of wit, elegance, moral insight, and technical brilliance. Pope transforms a petty social incident into a timeless satire of human vanity and the triviality of fashionable society, achieving what Dr. Johnson called the most attractive of all ludicrous compositions. The Pilgrim's Progress. OK 1405. Unit 2, Topic 7, John Bunyan. The Pilgrim's Progress. Q1. When was John Bunyan born and when did he die? A. Born 1628, died 1688. Q2. Where was Bunyan born? A. Elstow, Bedfordshire, England. Q3. What was Bunyan's trade or profession before becoming a preacher? A. He was a tinker, a mender of pots and pans, a humble working class occupation. 4. What religion did Bunyan belong to? A. He was a nonconformist Puritan, specifically a member of a Bedford Baptist congregation. Q5. Why was Bunyan imprisoned? And for how long? A. He was imprisoned for preaching without a license. From the Church of England, he spent approximately 12 years in Bedford jail, 1660 to 1672, and a shorter period in 1677. Q6. Where did Bunyan write the Pilgrim's Progress? A. Largely in Bedford jail during his first imprisonment, 1660 to 1672. Q7. When was the Pilgrim's Progress first published? A. 1678, Part 1. Part 2 was published in 1684. Q8. What is the full title of the Pilgrim's Progress? A. The Pilgrim's Progress from this world to that which is to come. Q9. What literary form is the Pilgrim's Progress? A. An allegory, a narrative in which characters, places, and events represent abstract moral and spiritual concepts. Q10. What is the narrative frame of the Pilgrim's Progress? A. It is presented as a dream. The narrator falls asleep and dreams the story of Christian's journey. This is the dream vision literary convention. Plot and structure. Q11. Who is the protagonist of the Pilgrim's Progress? Part 1. A. Christian, a man who represents every Christian soul seeking salvation. Q12. Where does Christian begin his journey and where does he travel to? A. He begins in the city of destruction, representing the sinful world, and travels to the celestial city, representing heaven. Q13. What burden does Christian carry at the beginning of the story? A. A heavy burden on his back, representing the weight of sin and guilt. Q14. Book does Christian read that causes his distress at the opening? A. The Bible reading it makes him aware of his sinfulness and the coming destruction of his city. Q15. Who first directs Christian on his journey? A. Evangelist, who points him toward the wicket gate, the narrow gate of salvation. Q16. What is the Slough of Despond? A. A boggy, muddy swamp that Christian falls into near the beginning of his journey. It represents the depression, doubt, and despair that overwhelm a person when they become aware of their sins. Q17. Who helps Christian out of the Slough of Despond? A. Helper figure who pulls Christian out, representing divine assistance. Q18. What is the wicket gate? A. A narrow gate that Christian must enter to begin the true path to salvation, representing the straight gate of Matthew 7:13-14. Narrow is the way that leadeth unto life. Q19. Who keeps the wicket gate? A. Goodwill, representing God's grace and willingness to receive sinners. Q20. What is the house of the interpreter? A. A house Christian visits after the wicket gate. The interpreter shows him a series of emblematic scenes that teach him spiritual lessons. It represents the Holy Spirit as teacher and guide. Key places and episodes. Q21. Where does Christian's burden fall off and what does this represent? A. At the foot of the cross, the place of deliverance, his burden rolls away and falls into the sepulchre. This represents the moment of conversion and forgiveness through Christ's atonement. Q22. What is the palace beautiful? A. A grand house on a hill where Christian is welcomed, fed, and shown the armor of God. It represents the Christian church providing fellowship, instruction, and spiritual armament. Q23. Who are the three sisters at the palace beautiful? A. Discretion, piety, prudence, and charity. There are actually four. They represent the virtues of the Christian community. Q24. What is the valley of humiliation? A. A valley where Christian battles the demon Apollyon. It represents the experience of humbling oneself before God and facing spiritual temptation. Q25. Who is Apollyon? A. A fearsome monster whose name means destroyer. He represents the devil who attacks Christian and claims ownership of him since Christian was born in his territory, the city of destruction. Q26. What is the valley of the shadow of death? A. A dark, terrifying valley full of hobgoblins, satyrs, dragons, and the mouth of hell. Christian must pass through it alone in darkness. It represents the experience of spiritual desolation, doubt, and the fear of death. Q27. Who is faithful and what happens to him? A. Faithful is Christian's companion who joins him on the journey. He is put on trial at Vanity Fair and martyred, burned at the stake, after which he ascends directly to the celestial city. Q28. What is Vanity Fair? A. A town where a year-round fair is held, selling all worldly pleasures, honors, and lusts. It represents the corrupt, materialistic world that tempts and persecutes true Christians. Based on the fairs of Bunyan's time. Q29. Who presides over Vanity Fair? A. Beelzebub, Apollyon, and legion figures representing Satan and his agents. Q30. Who joins Christian after Faithful's martyrdom? A. Hopeful, a man from Vanity Fair who is converted by witnessing Faithful's death. He represents the virtue of hope, Q31. What is Doubting Castle? A. A castle where Christian and Hopeful are imprisoned by the giant despair. It represents the state of spiritual despair and doubt that can paralyze a Christian, Q32. Who is giant despair? A. The owner of Doubting Castle. He represents the sin of despair, beating Christian and Hopeful and urging them to commit suicide. Q33. How do Christian and Hopeful escape from Doubting Castle? A. Christian remembers he has a key called promise, the promises of God in scripture, which opens all the doors of the castle. They escape, Q34. What is the Delectable Mountains? A. Beautiful mountains from which the celestial city can be seen. They represent the characters, an allegory, Q41. Who is Mr. Worldly Wise Man and what does he represent? A. A man who tries to divert Christian from the true path, advising him to seek relief from his burden through morality and reason alone rather than through the cross. He represents the worldly, rationalistic approach to religion that Bunyan rejected, Q42. Who is Pliable and what does he represent? A. A neighbor who initially joins Christian but turns back after falling into the slough of despond. Represents the person who is initially enthusiastic about religion but gives up when difficulties arise. Q43. Who is Obstinate and what does he represent? A. Another neighbor who refuses to join Christian and tries to persuade him to return. He represents stubborn worldliness and rejection of spiritual truth, Q44. Who is Talkative and what does he represent? A. A man who talks eloquently about religion but does not practice it. He represents hypocrisy and the danger of confusing religious talk with genuine faith. Q45. Who is By Ends and what does he represent? A. A man who follows religion only when it is profitable or fashionable. He represents those who are religious for selfish motives, seeking worldly advantage through piety. Q46. Who is Ignorance and what does he represent? A. A young man from the country of conceit who joins the pilgrims near the end. He believes his own good heart and good life will get him to heaven without true faith or conviction of sin. He represents self-righteous religious ignorance. Q47. What is the significance of the names of characters in the Pilgrim's Progress? A. Bunyan uses allegorical naming. Every character's name directly states their moral quality or spiritual condition. Christian, Faithful, Hopeful, Ignorance, Talkative, etc. Making the moral meaning immediately clear to readers. Themes, style, and significance. Q48. What are the major themes of the Pilgrim's Progress? A. The Christian journey of salvation, faith versus works, perseverance through trials, the dangers of worldliness and hypocrisy, grace and redemption, the community of believers, and the certainty of heaven for true believers. Q49. What is the literary style of the Pilgrim's Progress and what are its influences? A. Written in plain, vigorous English prose, strongly influenced by the King James Bible. Bunyan's style is simple, direct, and vivid, making complex theological ideas accessible to ordinary readers. It also draws on the dream vision tradition, Langland's Piers Plowman, and the emblem, book tradition, Q50. What is the lasting literary significance of the Pilgrim's Progress? A. It is the most widely read book in English after the Bible, translated into over 200 languages. It virtually created the English novel's tradition of moral journey narrative, directly influencing writers like Defoe, Thackeray. Vanity Fair takes its name from Bunyan, Dickens, Louisa May, Alcott, Little Women, and C.S. Lewis. It remains the supreme example of Puritan allegory and one of the greatest works of prose fiction in English literature. Topic 7. John Bunyan. Last one. Robert Burton. Anatomy of Melancholy. Okay, 1406. Unit 2, Topic 8. Robert Burton. Anatomy of Melancholy. 1. When was Robert Burton born and when did he die? A. Born 1577, died 1640. Q2. Where was Burton born? A. Lindley, Leicestershire, England. Q3. What university did Burton attend and where did he spend most of his life? A. He attended Brasenose College and then Christ Church, Oxford. He spent virtually his entire adult life at Oxford as a student and clergyman. Q4. What position did Burton hold at Oxford? A. He was a student, fellow of Christ Church, Oxford. A position he held for over 40 years until his death. Q5. What ecclesiastical positions did Burton hold? A. He was vicar of St. Thomas's Church, Oxford, from 1616, and later held the living of Seagrave in Leicestershire from 1630. Q6. Under what pen name did Burton publish The Anatomy of Melancholy? A. Democritus Jr., after Democritus, the ancient Greek philosopher, known as the laughing philosopher, who laughed at human folly. 7. Why did Burton choose the pseudonym Democritus Jr.? A. to suggest he was a modern successor to Democritus, adopting a detached, ironic perspective on human folly and madness, laughing at the world's absurdities rather than weeping over them. Q8. When was The Anatomy of Melancholy first published? A. 1621. Burton continued revising and expanding it through 5 more editions until his death. The final edition appeared in 1651. Q9. How many editions of The Anatomy of Melancholy appeared during and shortly after Burton's lifetime? A. 6 editions. 1621, 1624, 1628, 1632, 1638, and 1651 posthumous. Q10. What is the full title of The Anatomy of Melancholy? A. The Anatomy of Melancholy. What it is, with all the kinds, causes, symptoms, prognosticas, and several cures of it. Structure and form. Q11. What does the word anatomy mean in the title? A. A systematic dissection or analysis. Burton uses the medical metaphor of dissecting a body to mean a thorough methodical examination of melancholy in all its aspects. Q12. How is the anatomy of melancholy structured? A. Into 3 large partitions, each divided into sections, members, and subsections, following the structure of a medical or scholastic treatise. Q13. What are the 3 partitions of the anatomy of melancholy? A. Partition 1. The nature, causes, and symptoms of melancholy. Partition 2. The cure of melancholy. Partition 3. Love melancholy and religious melancholy. Q14. What is the Democritus Junior to the Reader section? A. A long, sprawling preface in which Burton, as Democritus Jr., introduces himself, explains his purpose, satirizes human folly, and discusses the nature of melancholy. It is itself a masterpiece of digressive prose and is often read independently. Q15. How long is The Anatomy of Melancholy? A. Approximately 1,400 pages in modern editions, one of the longest prose works in English literature. Q16. What languages does Burton quote from in the text? A. Latin, Greek, Hebrew, French, Italian, and English. The text is extraordinarily learned, drawing on sources across ancient and Renaissance scholarship. Q17. What is the predominant language of quotation in the book? A. Latin. A large proportion of Burton's quotations and citations are in Latin, reflecting the scholarly culture of his time. Q18. What is the literary genre of The Anatomy of Melancholy? A. It defies easy classification. It is simultaneously a medical treatise, a work of moral philosophy, a satirical essay, an encyclopedia, a commonplace book, and a work of literary art. It is often called an anatomy in the Renaissance sense of a comprehensive analysis. Q19. What is a commonplace book, and how does the anatomy relate to this form? A. A commonplace book is a collection of quotations, ideas, and observations gathered from wide reading. Burton's anatomy resembles a vast, organized commonplace book, drawing together quotations from hundreds of authors on the subject of melancholy under. Q20. What is the structural principle Burton borrowed from scholastic philosophy? A. The method of division and subdivision, breaking a subject into its component parts through systematic classification, as medieval scholars divided philosophical and theological questions. Melancholy definition and causes. Chapter 21. What is melancholy according to Burton? A. A disease of the mind and body caused by an excess of black bile, one of the 4 humors of ancient medicine. But Burton extends the concept far beyond medicine to encompass depression, anxiety, obsession, madness, and the general human condition of unhappiness. Q22. What are the 4 humors of ancient medicine that Burton draws upon? A. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, choler, and black bile, melancholy, each associated with a temperament, sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, and melancholic. Q23. What causes melancholy according to Burton? A. An enormous range of causes, supernatural, god, devils, witches, natural, stars and planets, heredity, climate, diet, age, sex, and accidental, education, poverty, love, ambition, idleness, solitude, fear. Q24. What does Burton say is the primary cause of melancholy? A. Original sin. The fall of man in the Garden of Eden is the ultimate source of all human misery, disease, and melancholy. All other causes are secondary. Q25. What role does idleness play in causing melancholy, according to Burton? A. Idleness is one of the chief causes. Burton famously says, idleness is the bane of body and mind. An idle mind becomes prey to melancholic thoughts and imagination. Q26. What is love melancholy, as described in Partition 3? A. A form of melancholy caused by frustrated or excessive romantic love. Burton describes its symptoms, causes, and cures in great detail, drawing on classical and Renaissance sources. Q27. What is religious melancholy, as described in Partition 3a? A form of melancholy caused by excessive religious fear, despair of salvation, or religious enthusiasm. Burton examines both atheism and religious fanaticism as forms of mental disturbance. Q28. What does Burton say about the relationship between genius and melancholy? A. Following Aristotle's Problemata, Burton notes that many great men, poets, philosophers, artists are melancholic. Melancholy is associated with exceptional intellectual gifts as well as suffering. Q29. What role do the stars and planets play in causing melancholy according to Burton? A. Burton follows the astrological tradition. Saturn is the planet most associated with melancholy. Those born under Saturn's influence are predisposed to melancholic temperament. Q30. What does Burton say about the universality of melancholy? A. He argues that melancholy is universal. All the world is mad. Virtually every human being suffers from some form of melancholy, making it not an individual disease, but the general human condition. Symptoms and cures. Q31. What are the main symptoms of melancholy according to Burton? A. Fear and sorrow without apparent cause, distrust, suspicion, jealousy, discontent, restlessness, solitude-seeking, hallucinations, obsessive thoughts, physical complaints, headaches, palpitations, insomnia, and despair. Q32. What cures does Burton recommend for melancholy? A. An enormous range, including diet and exercise, music, travel, good company, reading, marriage, for love melancholy, religious faith, purging and medical remedies, fresh air, and the avoidance of idleness. Q33. What does Burton say about music as a cure for melancholy? A. He strongly recommends music as one of the most effective remedies, citing ancient and classical authorities who use music therapeutically. Music can lift the spirits and calm disturbed minds. Q234. What does Burton recommend regarding diet for melancholy sufferers? A. He advises avoiding heavy dark foods, beef, pork, cabbage, pulses, which increase black bile, and recommends light, easily digestible foods. Also moderation in wine and avoidance of excess. Q35. What does Burton say about the role of exercise in curing melancholy? A. Exercise is one of his most important recommended cures. Physical activity disperses the black bile and lifts the spirits. He discusses various forms from walking to hunting to swimming. Q36. What is Burton's view on the use of herbs and medicines for melancholy? A. He discusses an enormous range of herbal and pharmaceutical remedies drawn from ancient, medieval, and Renaissance medicine, including hellebore, tobacco, and various purging medicines, though he is sometimes skeptical of extreme medical treatments. Q37. What does Burton recommend as the ultimate cure for melancholy? A. Religious faith and trust in God's providence. The deepest cure for melancholy is spiritual. Turning to God, prayer, and the consolations of religion provides what no medical remedy can. Q38. What paradox lies at the heart of Burton's writing about melancholy? A. Burton himself suffered from melancholy. He wrote the book, he says, as a form of self-therapy. I write of melancholy by being busy to avoid melancholy. The very act of writing was his cure. Style and literary qualities. Q39. How would you describe the prose style of the Anatomy of Melancholy? A. Extraordinarily digressive, learned, witty, and encyclopedic. Burton piles, quotation upon quotation, digresses into countless related topics, mixes serious scholarship with comic anecdote, and writes with ironic detachment and warm humanity. Q40. What is the significance of Burton's digressions? A. The digressions are not failures of organization, but a deliberate stylistic strategy. They mirror the wandering, associative nature of the melancholic mind itself. The form enacts the content. Q41. What is the digression of air in the Anatomy of Melancholy? A. A famous digression in Partition 2, in which Burton imagines himself flying through the air and serving the whole world. A utopian fantasy that is one of the most celebrated passages in the book for its imaginative freedom and satirical scope. Q42. What is the Utopia section of the preface and what does it contain? A. In the preface, Democritus Jr. imagines his own ideal commonwealth, a satirical utopia that criticizes contemporary society's political, religious, and social abuses. Q43. How does Burton use humor in the Anatomy of Melancholy? A. Through irony, comic anecdote, self-deprecating wit, absurd juxtapositions of authorities, and the comic contrast between the gravity of the medical/scholarly framework and the human absurdities being described. Q44. What is Burton's attitude toward his own sources? A. He quotes them copiously and respectfully, but also critically and ironically. He is aware that authorities contradict each other and often uses this contradiction for comic or skeptical effect. Q45. How does the Anatomy of Melancholy reflect Renaissance humanism? A. Through its vast learning, its synthesis of classical, medieval, and contemporary knowledge, its belief that human understanding can encompass all subjects, and its combination of moral seriousness with intellectual playfulness. Influence and significance. Q46. Which major romantic poet was deeply influenced by the anatomy of melancholy? A. John Keats. He said he had read Burton's Anatomy before writing Lamia, 1820, and used it as a source for the story. The Eve of Saint Agnes also shows Burton's influence. Q47. How did Samuel Johnson regard the Anatomy of Melancholy? A. Johnson said it was the only book that ever got him out of bed 2 hours earlier than he wished. He found it so compelling and entertaining that he could not stop reading it. Q48. How did Lawrence Sterne's Tristram Shandy draw on the anatomy of melancholy? A. Sterne borrowed extensively from Burton, both in style, digressive, associative prose, and content, ideas about the humors, learning, and human eccentricity. Sterne's borrowings were so extensive, they were considered plagiarism by some. Q49. What is the significance of the anatomy of melancholy in the history of psychology? A. It is one of the earliest and most comprehensive attempts to describe and classify mental illness in English. It anticipates modern psychology's interest in depression, anxiety, and the relationship between mind and body, and has been called a precursor to modern psychiatry. Bond. Q50. What is the lasting literary significance of the anatomy of melancholy? A. It is one of the most extraordinary books in the English language, impossible to classify, inexhaustible in its learning and wit, and deeply human in its recognition that melancholy is the universal condition of thinking beings. It influenced writers from Sterne and Keats to Jorge Luis Borges and W.G. Sebold. As a work of literature, it stands as a monument to Renaissance encyclopedism and the power of the digressive, associative mind, a book that, as Dr. Johnson said, is worth getting up early to read. Topic 8. Robert Burton